Do you think that young master will take away Miss Celine? Isn't that obvious? That will happen. Have you ever heard of anyone that has ever escaped from his claws? That's right, I have heard about how vicious he is. Furthermore, he treats women as his playthings. I really hate this kind of guy. That's right. Men are all the same, disgusting. What nonsense are you saying? If I remember correctly, you have a boyfriend, right? That's true, and I heard that she was the one that pursued him. Hey, I only went after him because I have to leave behind a generation that my parents will call grandchildren. But all the same, I still don't like men. Should we call the police and inform them about what is going on here? Are you a fool or something? This young master has connections with the police. Otherwise, how do you think that there are several people who file a complaint about him but he is still enjoying himself out here? You should really not try doing something like calling the police. You know, this is the most stupid idea. The police will simply say that you are the one that made a call. The end result will be that the young master will come after you. But Mrs. Caitlin and young Miss Celine were always good to us. We should at least help them out, right? Help them your head. What can you do in that situation? Go ahead and try and see what will happen. You're the one that is going to suffer from that young master's wrath. And I hope that you won't involve me in your stupidity. He is right, you know. Although the two of them have helped us a lot, it's not to the extent that it will need us to sacrifice our lives for them. That's right. This might even affect our families, what do you know? If that's the case, then I'm leaving. I can't wait here for that young master to come over and simply point at me so that I can be beaten up if he is irritated. Hey, wait for me. I'm going with you. And, what do you think about the young man that entered the office even after we tried stopping him? Him? He should have already been beaten up. Didn't you see the three bulky guys that entered the office before him? He was so stupid. His fate was sealed the moment that he entered that office. The staff members of the Angel's Prominence were chattering. Some had excited expressions, waiting to see what was going to happen next. Others had sad and helpless expressions while others were expressionless, clearly not caring about the outcome of the situation. They were just chattering when they saw someone else arriving on the floor. At normal times, they wouldn't have noticed him. But this time, they noticed him easily because this person was going straight for the office. Hey, you shouldn't go there if you love your life. One of the staff members tried warning the young man that had appeared here. There were a few others that joined in. The young man frowned a little. Then, he rushed towards the office that they were trying to stop him from heading towards. Another fool that doesn't value his life, sigh. Guys, did you notice something? What something are you talking about? Didn't this young man look exactly like the one that entered there before him? Now that you mention it, I can see the semblance between them. Could they be twins? Bang! The crowd was forced to stop talking due to the actions of the young man. They couldn't believe that he just kicked open the door of the director's office. Ah, I remember that young man. I think he refers to Mrs. Caitlin as aunt. Oh, that's why he rushed over. Now that makes sense. Although they could see that the door had been opened, none of them dared to approach. They were afraid that they would get implicated the moment that they were seen by those that were inside the office. So, they stayed a distance from the office and waited for what was going to happen. After almost 10 minutes elapsed, they were surprised to see that someone was coming out of the office. But, the one that was walking out surprised them the most because he was the person that they had thought that he was going to be beaten up. Then, their eyes widened when they saw that the lofty young master, the one who had previously gone to Caitlin's office arrogantly, was being pulled outside by the collar of his shirt. His face didn't look good at all. They could tell from the swelling of his cheeks that he had been beaten up inside there. This just confused them further, making them wonder what just happened inside there. Jonathan saw them looking his way. He then snorted. Even though he knew that Arthur was really beyond the scope of what these employees could handle, he didn't like their reaction at all. Even if you can't help, why the hell are you going around speaking nonsense? Why are you simply saying that they are doomed? Just wish them luck if you can't help instead of cursing at them. Without caring any more about what they were thinking, Jonathan roughly pulled Arthur, who was feeling humiliated under the gazes of the employees here. But, no matter how he struggled, he found that he had no way of getting himself out of Jonathan's grasp. As for the employees, they were almost tempted to ask Jonathan about what had happened inside there. But, they held themselves back, remembering that it was their boss who was in trouble. And, none of them went forward to help her out. As they were still wondering what had happened inside the office, Jonathan got into the elevator with Arthur and they left. And before long, as the staff members began making assumptions of what might have happened inside Caitlin's office, they saw another person getting out of the office. They immediately recognized him as the person that had gone into the office last. But the cold expression on his face as he looked at them made them flinch. They were sweating as Jack's gaze washed over them. In the end, they were forced to take a few steps backwards as they opened a path for him. They then saw him turning towards the office. He said, "You know, I can see that single eye that you are using to peep on the situation. So, better get on your feet and follow me out of here. You will have to get punished as well." Then what followed next was, the three guys that had been bouncing, trying to show their might as they entered Caitlin's office, were now running out of the office as if they were a bunch of scared rats. "We will wait for you downstairs, young master," one of the three stated before the three of them rushed off. And they didn't head for the elevator. Instead, they went for the stairs. Their words made the crowd getting a little understanding of what might have happened inside there. Could it be that this person, Jack, whom some of them had seen coming to the company, was part of a bigger family than Arthur's? That was the only reason that they could think of. In the end, this could be the only reason as to why the three guys that were obviously under Arthur would treat him both fearfully and respectfully. After the three left, they saw that Jack was focusing his gaze on them. In the end, he sighed before he began walking towards the elevator. As he passed by the silent crowd, he muttered in a low voice, "A bunch of disloyal subordinates." Although he said that in a low voice, most of the people could hear him as the area was so quiet. In the end, they couldn't retort his words at all. Their boss had treated them well, but they simply stood to the side as she suffered alone. After getting into the elevator, Jack took another deep breath as he tried to calm himself. He was angry in that he was trying to hold in his anger at the moment. He wasn't just angered by the fact that Arthur had made a move on Celine and Caitlin. He was also angry at the fact that the employees that were working under Caitlin were not loyal to her at all. Although Caitlin was always strict on her ways of dealing with things related to work, none of the employees that were working in her company had ever suffered. They had their days off work, if they worked overtime they were paid, and so on. Just like Jonathan, although he knew that there was nothing that they could do to help in that situation because of Arthur's family background, why were they then talking nonsense behind Caitlin's back? Wasn't that the same as them kicking her when she was down? All the same, if this was his company, he would have made sure to do some screening and change to another batch of employees as long as the situation allowed. Knowing that this was something that Celine and her mother had to deal with by themselves, Jack shook his head and waited for the elevator to open. When he got out of the elevator, he was already on the ground floor. He could see that there seemed to be a commotion that had occurred here. From their words, Jack could already tell that this was related to Jonathan pulling Arthur by the collar of his shirt. Ignoring what was useless to him, Jack walked towards the parking lot of the building. There, he found Jonathan's car. He had seen this car once when Jonathan came to pay him a visit. It was a Rolls-Royce Cullinan. He got into the car and found that Arthur was seated on the backseat of the car. He was now obedient. As for the reason for that, it was due to the way that his face had swollen. Jack could tell that the guy had received a severe beating from Jonathan. As for the stupid threats that he was making before, from the way that his mouth was shut, it was obvious that he had realized that these won't work on the two. Seeing him like this, Jack shook his head. They were not going to deal with him here. They were going to do it in a place that they would have a freedom to do what they wanted without any kind of disturbances. Who is he anyway? I met him before when I was buying a building. He really pissed me off that day. He was lucky that I wasn't in a mood to beat him up for provoking me. Jack asked as he looked at Jonathan. I guess you will love this one. This is second uncle's first son. He should be 20-something years old now, I forgot. This guy and his father really have some fate with you. Jonathan chuckled as he said that. Fate bullshit. Before we met, I was fine. But now and then, there are some flies that come from nowhere to try disgusting me. You should at least handle all those that you have enmity with. I don't want them to confuse me with you. Jack snorted as he said. What are you saying? It's not like there was no one that confused me for you before, Jonathan retorted. What? You only had one. And what about me? We have Wendy, the guy called Who is that assassin again? Jack started counting before realizing that he had forgotten the name of the assassin that was after Jonathan. It should be Spider. What a short memory you have, Jonathan stated. What short memory? It's just that I don't like wasting my memory space on some dead people, Jack retorted. Then, he continued, and that's not all. As you can see, the idiot behind me also thought that I'm you. And, apart from that girlfriend of yours, all the others never came with good intentions. Tisk. Jonathan could only click his tongue as he had nothing to say here. Arthur, who was seated on the backseat of the car, was having his eyes widened in disbelief. Now, he understood what was going on here. I understand now. They must all be fakes, right? Then where's the original? He asked himself. Jack and Jonathan didn't know what Arthur was thinking at the moment. If they had known at the moment, they would surely have questioned what was going on in Arthur's father's head. It was clear that not only was Arthur a person that didn't care about the position of the family head. Furthermore, he was an idiot. If this person was really given the chance to head the whole Jezda family, there was no doubt that the family might actually collapse in his hands. Jonathan, who was looking at Jack, had no choice to give up. He knew all too well that what Jack had stated was the truth. Although the two of them had been mistaken for the other, it was true that it was Jack that had faced the most problems. But he wasn't going to say sorry. In his mind, he shrugged and said, "I'm not the one that told you to look like me, am I?" But he didn't dare to say that out loud because he knew that another round of argument would start between the two of them. Although they were inside the car at the moment, he could see that there were several people that were pointing at his car. It was obvious that they had attracted the attention of a lot of people with the way that he had dragged Arthur with him. Shaking his head, Jonathan started driving from the area. They still had to deal with Arthur. And what Jack wanted to do, that was something that they would need somewhere private. He didn't want there to be some evidence so that the police would call him to have tea. So, it was better to do this in a secluded place. As Jonathan drove away, Jack kept his eyes on Arthur, who was seated on the backseat. He was ready to make a move just in case Arthur tried jumping out of the car. As for whether he really would do that, this was something that Jack doubted. He had already noticed that Arthur was someone who bullied the weak and feared the strong. Those that he considered strong were always dealt with by his father. But now that he didn't have the chance to call his father, it was obvious that he was the weak here. Jonathan drove towards the outskirts of the city. He wasn't just going anywhere, he was going somewhere that he had prepared for situations like the one that they were in at the moment. When they reached the outskirts of the city, the number of the skyscrapers had dropped. Although there were some tall buildings here, they were scattered. Not long after they got to the outskirts, Jonathan drove towards a warehouse building. Jack could tell that for some reason, this place was abandoned already. As if seeing through Jack's thoughts, Jonathan smiled and said, "I'm still planning on starting a project. This warehouse here is on the land that I'm planning on building something here. It is related to the deal that made with the Baldy." "What is that thing or project that you are planning on starting?" Jack asked curiously. The area on which the warehouse was standing on was definitely not small at all. For Jonathan to require this big size of land, there had to be something that he was going to build here, and that thing was definitely not something small. "Hee, you don't have to worry. This is something that I have been planning for some time now already. I don't plan on using the family's influence or money either. This is something that completely belongs to me." Jonathan chuckled as he packed the car. Jack didn't try pursuing because he could tell that Jonathan wasn't willing to reveal what it really was that he was planning here. But all the same, he didn't care that much because this didn't involve him that much. The two of them got out of the car. What followed was Arthur, who was looking around vigilantly, alighting as well. "Is this place okay?" Jack questioned as his eyes turned cold as he gazed at Arthur that was getting down from the car. "Of course. Otherwise, why would I have brought you here if I knew that there would be a problem? I made sure that my men cleared this area because I wasn't willing to reveal what it was that I'm planning on doing here," Jonathan replied. Jack looked at Arthur and asked again, "Are you really sure about that? After all, I can see that a certain someone here has some plans after all. And he would surely reveal this information to his father." At the mention of Arthur's father, Jack's voice chilled even further. At the end of the day, this was the person that was involved in his mother's death. There was no way that he was going to let him go. In other words, although he had yet to make a move on him, that didn't mean that he had forgotten the fact that it was this uncle of his that had contacted Marion and used her to get rid of his mother. Not like there's something that he can say and be trusted. If he speaks of anything else, they can at least believe him. But the matters concerning serious business, even his father won't believe him because this guy is just an idiot. Jonathan scoffed as he replied. "Hey Jonathan, who are you calling an idiot?" Arthur looked at Jonathan angrily as he asked. He didn't like the feeling of being treated as if he didn't even exist. And although he was already scared from the beating that he had received, he couldn't help but mutter in displeasure. But the moment that he met Jonathan's cold eyes, he lowered his head as he shivered. "Can I start already?" Jack asked impatiently. The more that he looked at Arthur's face, the angry that he got. This idiot not only tried forcing that he had to marry Celine, but he had made his subordinate slap Caitlin. If it was another time, before he regained his memory, perhaps Jack might not have been so angry at this. But now that he viewed Caitlin as someone close to him, just like his mother, there was no way that he was going to let this idiot go. Just don't kill him, Jonathan shrugged as he responded. Why should I not do that? I don't like silly provocations, you know. Jack gazed at him and asked. If he dies, then Grandpa will make a move. Although this idiot is the one that started all of this, it is also true that he is a member of the Jezda family. So, the moment that he dies, Grandpa won't let the person that was behind it go, Jonathan replied. This was the reason as to why he had never killed Arthur. He could beat him up and so on, but as long as he was the one that had killed Arthur, it was a sure bet that the old man would make a move to punish him. This was something that even his mother couldn't handle. He wasn't ready to make problems for her. And although Arthur's father had always made moves to kill Jonathan, he had made sure to hide the evidence. In this way, even if Jonathan reported this, the old man wouldn't make a move as long as there was no evidence that proved that Arthur's father was the one that had made a move. As for Arthur, there were already way too many people that had seen them together. So, the moment that the news of Arthur's death were revealed, there was no doubt that they would doubt him first. And with the plans that he was having in his mind, Jonathan wasn't ready to attract the attention from the family, as this would make his dealings hard. As if I'm afraid of that, Jack snorted as he attacked Arthur directly. Jonathan. Bam. Bang. Although he had been expecting that things wouldn't be easy on him, Arthur had never expected that Jack wouldn't be lenient on him. The attack that Jack had unleashed blew Arthur and he hit his back on the car before falling on the ground as he groaned in pain. The car's door that Arthur had hit dented a little. Although the dent was only small, it was still a dent at the end of the day. Jonathan, on the other hand, was left speechless by Jack's actions. He looked at him as he cried in his mind, "What has my car done for you to actually target it?" This was something that he wanted to ask but had no choice but to forget about it. Why you? If you dare to hit me again, my father won't let you go. Feeling the intense pain that was rampaging in his body, Arthur tried threatening his way out of the situation. As if I care about that father of yours. But I have a question for you. Did you ever think about the consequences that you would face the moment that you dared to try taking my girl by force? Jack snorted as he replied. Before Arthur could reply, Jack stepped on his fingers. The pain that Arthur felt made him scream in agony. He was someone that wasn't used to this. So, just a little pain made him cry so loudly as if his life depended on how loud he screamed. Jack didn't stop there, he was venting his anger, so, he didn't make any other big moves after he kicked Arthur down. All the others that he made had the intention of making sure that Arthur suffered from pain. He broke his fingers one after the other. Then, he broke his hand. What followed next was a thorough beating that completely deformed Arthur's face. Jack didn't stop there. He went on and broke his legs as well. Since this guy couldn't sit in a single place and could go around causing trouble, Jack was intent on making sure that he stayed on bed. This was what he had resolved himself to doing. As long as someone dared to provoke him, Jack would make sure that the price that was paid was heavy. In this way, the others who might know about his actions would have to think twice before they dared to try offending him. As for the repercussions that came from his actions, it wasn't like he was afraid. Since Anita and Arthur knew about his existence, he might as well go ahead and deal with this idiot's father if he got involved. Jonathan, on the other hand, felt a chill as he looked at Jack torturing Arthur. In the end, he thought, I guess I should add a few more shares? Jack made sure to administer the punishment on Arthur in such a way that he would not get out of bed for a long period of time. He had broken several of his bones, made sure that he would no longer go looking for girls like a Randy he goat. In other words, he had made sure that he faced the same thing that Collins faced when he tried forcing himself on Celine. As for Jonathan, since Jack wasn't killing Arthur, to him, it didn't matter what happened to Arthur at all. Even if Arthur had died, he wouldn't have cared. It was just that he didn't want the matters concerning his death to be linked to him. In other words, he didn't want his grandfather to blame him that he was the one that was responsible of the death of his cousin. Although he wasn't the one that would have killed him directly, he would have done that indirectly. And if that was put on him, his chances of being selected as the next family head would drop drastically. With the aim of making sure that his mother had a comfortable life in the family, he wanted to get the position. Otherwise, he would have cared nonetheless about such a thing. After he was done with what he wanted to do, Jack looked at Jonathan and said, "Now that we are done with this idiot, why don't you tell me that you are ready to give me the shares that you promised me?" I tried contacting you to inform you that I have already completed the preparations for the transfer of the shares. But for some reason, you never picked any of my calls. So, I had no choice but to come and look for your girlfriend so that I can ask about your whereabouts," Jonathan replied. Jack looked at him and nodded. On this day, he hadn't taken his phone with him as he left the villa. As for Jonathan knowing of where he was, that was nearly impossible in the whole city. Jack had moved to the Serenity residential area. And even so, he didn't tell Jonathan about that. So, it was understandable that he would look for Celine as she was the one that might have a clue about where he was. And that was true because Celine had visited his villa twice. Had it not been for her busy schedule, she might have visited him more than that. Jonathan looked at Arthur, who had already lost consciousness, then back at Jack. He sighed and looked at a certain corner and shouted, "What the hell are you idiots doing there? Better get here and take this trash from here. Otherwise, he is going to die and you are the ones that are going to be blamed for that." The moment that he finished speaking, the 3 bodyguards that Arthur always brought with him rushed out. Then, they gave a deep bow to both Jack and Jonathan before they picked up Arthur from the ground and left the area as fast as they could. At the same time, they couldn't help but curse Arthur in their hearts. Their lives were just fine, that was until they were assigned as his bodyguards. Although they had never liked what Arthur was doing, they were not in a position to stop him at all. And now, his habits had led them into landing into the bad books of Jonathan. Not to mention Jack, who they were more afraid of now that they had seen him in action. If they could, they would have run away from all of this. But this was something that was impossible. When they were chosen amongst all the applicants that had wanted to work for the Jezda family, they were informed that they would never run away from their responsibilities. If they dared to do that, they would be risking their families as well. Alpha Glesn Nuel, there were some people that had tried running away after making a mistake. But in the end, none of them ended up well. They had their families kidnapped. And by using their families, those that had run away were forced to come and face their punishment. And they had failed in their mission of protecting Arthur from the vicious beating that he had received. All that they would have to do at the moment would be to give the full report about what happened here. Although they would still be punished, they hoped that their punishment would be reduced. Jack watched them leaving without saying a word. As for the one that had slapped Caitlin, that guy would have to be dealt with by Jonathan. He was now interested in the issue concerning the shares that Jonathan was intending on transferring to him. Knowing what he was thinking, Jonathan sighed and went ahead to open the door of his car. Then, he took a few documents that he had placed on the dashboard and gave them to Jack. Indeed, he was unwilling to part with these shares. But, he had no choice because he had made a promise that he would give them to Jack. These shares were the ones that he owned. He had been working hard to acquire them. In other words, they were not related to the Jezda family at all. Although he was giving Jack the shares, that didn't mean that he was giving him all the shares that he had on him. At the end of the day, he wasn't working for Jack. So, he was only going to hand over the least amount of shares that he could give, and that from the companies that weren't the best that he was having shares of. But all the same, he was pained by the fact that he would have to part with these shares that he was having. Jack cared not about what Jonathan was thinking or feeling. What was in his mind at the moment was whether the system would actually multiply the shares that he was receiving or not. If it was going to be multiplied, that was something that he was going to be happy about. But if the multiplier effect wasn't going to be applied here, he would be greatly disappointed with the system. He was after all intending to shoot to the skies using the shares that Jonathan was giving him. He read through the document with great expectation. At the same time, Jonathan talked about the shares that he was giving him. "The shares that I'm offering you are those that belong to Calmont Entertainment Company. Although it's not as big as compared to the rose that the Baldy gave to Celine, it's not that bad as well. It has a net worth of $70 billion. I currently hold 20% shares of that company. So, I'm giving you half of that, 10%. This should be enough, right?" Jonathan asked at the end of it. Jack read through the document. Since he knew that he might be rewarded by the system a company, he had been paying attention to the companies out there. So, he knew about Calmont as well. Although it couldn't be considered amongst the top entertainment companies in the country, it was a middle tier one. The 10% shares that he had received from Jonathan was the same as him receiving $7 billion. Although it wasn't bad considering that this was just the compensation for Jonathan trying to use him to get himself out of trouble with his mother. Jack was a little dissatisfied about that. He looked at Jonathan and asked, "Why don't you just give me all the shares that you are having in Calmont? You know, just to make sure that they won't confuse me with you." "Dream on. Do you think that I got those shares that easily?" I had to work hard so that I could even have a chance of getting the amount of money to buy those shares. And now, I just gave you half of them." Jonathan was immediately infuriated by Jack's greedy side. If he could, he would have surely beaten up Jack. He had been working hard to accumulate his own wealth that wasn't linked to the Jezda family. He had started a long time ago, and it was due to his sharp mind that he had managed to get the shares. To give them to Jack because of a petty reason like him being used to deal with Anita's questions, it really made his heart bleed. But he knew that perhaps in the future, he might have to depend on Jack for something. As such, he decided to think of this as investment from him. Jack sighed. He had expected that Jonathan wouldn't agree to this. But all the same, he had at least gotten a few billions worth of shares that would help him in the long-run establishment of the Jackson enterprise. Now then, it was time for him to sign the document and see if the system was going to multiply the shares that he had received or not. He looked at Jonathan and asked, "You gave me the document but you didn't give me the pen to sign this thing." Jonathan's lips twitched when he heard that. But all the same, he took out a pen from the car and handed it to Jack. Jack smiled as he placed the signature at the bottom of the paper. Immediately after he was done with that, a system prompt appeared. His smile widened further as he read the prompt that had appeared in front of his eyes. "You've received 10% shares of Calmand Entertainment Company. Multiplier applied. You receive 90% shares of Calmand Entertainment Company. You receive 88% shares of the Rose Entertainment Company." Seeing the two system prompts that had appeared before his eyes, Jack was completely ecstatic. He had been expecting that there was a chance that the shares that he had received would not be multiplied. But the surprise that he had received was bigger than he had expected. Not only had the shares been multiplied, but he had also been given something that he had never expected before. Instead of owning 10% shares of Calmand Entertainment Company, he now owned 100% shares of it. In other words, the company was now fully under his control. Then, the part that excited him the most was the fact that he had received 88% shares of the Rose Entertainment Company. The Rose was a company that was bigger than Calmand, and so, it was obvious that the 88% shares that he had received had a greater value than the 90% shares that came from Calmand. But what made Jack's expression weird was the fact that he had only received 88% shares of the Rose. He was wondering why he had not acquired all of it. But on the second note, could it be that the 12% shares that were not in his hands were the ones that Celine was having? If that was so, then Jack could say that the system was very considerate. But still, he would have to ask Celine about it to confirm. But there was another thing that Jack wasn't understanding at all. He had received 10% shares from Jonathan. These 10% shares were worth $7 billion. That meant that, if the multiplier effect were to take place, he was supposed to get something that was worth $700 billion. E alpha glesn null, but, no matter how he looked at it, the shares that he had received, even if he added the shares of the two companies that were in his hands, they would not be able to reach $200 billion, let alone $700 billion. So, where was the rest of the over $500 billion worth of shares that he was supposed to receive? As if reading his mind, another system prompt appeared in front of his eyes, followed by Angel's voice. The 10% shares that you received were not only something that you got due to coercion, but also because you never worked for it. So, the multiplier effect wasn't at 100 times. Just like the income that you received from betting, there is a limit to the number of times the multiplier effect would take place when you receive money or any other income from the others as presents and so on. The current number of times remaining is 5. Jack was left speechless. What did the system mean by saying that he didn't work for it? He had literally made Anita forget about asking Jonathan about where he had been during the 1 year that he had disappeared. So, that was considered as work. As coercion, that was something that he didn't do, right? He had only asked for payment so that he could work for him. And although he only introduced himself, he had made sure that Anita didn't focus on where Jonathan was during that 1 year. In other words, he didn't use the normal means to complete the work that he had been asked to complete. And what the heck was this limit thing again? Why was the system always looking for ways to make sure that he won't make a quick buck? Now, this was getting onto his nerves. Jonathan, who was watching Jack from the side, was stunned when he saw that Jack was simply looking in front of him, without saying or doing anything. It was like he was in a daze. Jonathan then saw a smile appearing on Jack's face. What followed next was that he frowned. And from the way that his face was turning ugly, Jonathan was stunned further. He was wondering if Jack had gone insane or something like that. He waved his hand in front of Jack's face. But the moment that his hand appeared in front of Jack's face, Jack, who was just in a daze, regained his focus and grabbed the hand that was in front of him. The force that Jack had applied made Jonathan flinch in pain. "Let go, will you? You were acting like a lunatic or something, changing your expression from being happy to being angry." Hearing Jonathan's words, Jack finally realized that perhaps he had lost himself to the system prompts. It seemed that he had to learn to control his expression in front of other people. With a slight cough, he released Jonathan's hand. Then, he looked at Jonathan and began smiling. This action surprised Jonathan. "What are you smiling about? Have you become a fool after signing the document and gaining control of 10% shares?" Jonathan asked. "Wait for it, I'm sure that you will know about it soon," Jack continued smiling as he replied. Jonathan got even more confused about what Jack was talking about. In the end, he shook his head and decided to leave Jack alone. Just as he turned around, his phone rang. He picked it up and looked at it. It was the secretary of the board of directors of Calmond. He wondered what was going on. According to what he could remember, he had already informed them that he would be transferring 10% shares from his 20% shares to another person. So, he wasn't sure why the secretary was calling in the first place. But all the same, he picked up the call. "Hey Halton, what is it?" he asked. "Hello Mr. Jonathan. I wanted to inform you that all the procedures for the transfer of shares have been completed and the money has been transferred into your account," Halton stated. "Oh, that's okay." Jonathan nodded his head. He had just had Jack signing the transfer contract. So, it wasn't surprising that the company would have already done that in the database. But on the second note, Jonathan frowned. He asked, "What money are you talking about? I said I was going to transfer my shares to someone else. So, where is this money thing that you are talking about?" "Oh, I wasn't talking about the 10% shares that you had decided to transfer. I'm talking about the remaining 10% shares that were in your hands. These are the shares that I was telling you that we have already completed the transfer. As for the money, it has already been transferred to your account," Halton explained. Jonathan's expression turned weird. "Halton, I'm failing to understand what you are trying to imply here. I'm supposed to give away 10% shares. Then, I'm supposed to remain with 10% shares. So, what the hell is this about me selling my shares?" "Oh, didn't you say that you were going to sell all the shares in your hands? Every other member of the board that had shares of the company has also sold the shares that are in their hands," Halton stated. But this time, he too was confused by the way that Jonathan was reacting. Jonathan on the other hand was fuming. He was working hard so that he could get more shares. Since when did he even decide that he wanted to sell the shares that he owned? Now, he was being told that he had agreed to that? This was completely illogical. Could it be that the other members of the board agreed to that and thought that he had also agreed? But then, where on earth did they get his signature? After all, there was no way that the transfer would be completed if he did not sign the transfer contract. "When did we agree on selling the shares? I think I have forgotten about that. I have been having a lot on my mind recently," Jonathan asked. He knew that if he continued saying that he didn't agree to this, the other party might think of him as a lunatic. Halton finally understood why Jonathan had forgotten about this. So, he replied, "I understand Mr. Jonathan. You rich people have so many shares that you even forget about others that you own. So, I understand." "Understand your head. When did I have so many shares? I only have a few of them and I'm absolutely not willing to sell them. Forget about them. I always think about them every time that I can," Jonathan yelled in his mind. "It was yesterday that you signed the documents that stated that you agreed to sell your shares," Halton reminded. It was then that Jonathan remembered that the previous day, he had been indeed in a meeting with the other shareholders. At that time, he didn't pay much attention to what they were talking about. In the end of the meeting, they passed around a document that each and every of the shareholders signed. He followed the flow and signed the document, but he had never read the contents of the document. Jonathan's eyes widened in disbelief as he recalled that. Now, he didn't know what to say about this. He was never forced to sign it, he was never stopped from reading the document, and he was never told not to listen to what the others were saying. Now, even if he wanted to complain, to whom was he going to complain to? He wasn't coerced or something, he did it according to his own will. In the end, he could only shake his head as he let out a sigh of frustration. He then thought of something and asked, "By the way, who is the one that is buying the shares?" He wanted to know this so that perhaps, he could convince the other party to sell him the shares. Perhaps he can even buy more shares from the other party. The one that bought the shares should be Mr. Jackson. "Yeah, Mr. Jackson, that's it," Halton replied. Mr. Jackson, as Jonathan said that name, he turned around and looked at Jack, who was still having a smile on his face. At that moment, Jonathan understood who this Jackson was. Although there was no surname of the person that had bought the shares, the way that Jack was smiling at him was enough to tell him that Jack was the Jackson that they were talking about. "You bastard!" Jonathan shouted loudly. "You bastard!" Jonathan shouted loudly. Jack, on the other hand, simply smiled at that. From where he was, due to his sharp senses, he could clearly hear what Halton was saying on the other end of the phone. So, he knew why Jonathan was frustrated and angry at the same time. Still, he didn't like the name bastard. Although that was so, he decided to ignore that because he knew that Jonathan was currently pissed off. But at the same time, he asked, "Hey Angel, what the heck is this way of acquiring the shares? You don't even inform the shareholder that he would be selling his shares?" Although Jack was previously smiling, it was because he had thought that he would be able to laugh at Jonathan the moment that he realized that the person who would be buying his shares would be him. As such, he had never thought that even Jonathan himself wouldn't know that he was selling the shares. He was so surprised to hear that he had sold the shares and the money had come in already. How's that the system's fault? The idea was proposed to the board and he participated in the meeting. Instead of knowing what was going on in the meeting, he was thinking about his girlfriend. Perhaps he had thought that there was nothing important to discuss during that meeting. As such, he wasn't even paying attention to whatever was being said. He nodded his head to agree to the proposal when asked. As for the opinion about what they were supposed to do, he never gave a point and remained silent. So, the other shareholder made the decision. Then, there's a form that was signed. He too placed his signature, and that too without reading it. So, at the end of it all, it is his fault that he didn't know about the acquisition of the shares. So, don't blame the system. Jack. The form was signed the previous day. But, he had acquired the shares today. Now, was the system already expecting this to happen? Could the system see the future? Jack of course asked. The system is more than just a multiplier of what you are earning. So, upgrade the level of your authority as soon as possible to access even more features from the system. Jack didn't ask further. As for the matter where Jonathan was thinking of his girlfriend, he didn't need to ask to know that the system must have read through Jonathan's mind to know what he was thinking. All the same, he sighed at the way the system was overpowered. You should know that, the system never fails in the acquisition of something. If he read through the benefits that he would receive by selling the shares, even if he was keen during the meeting, it is a sure bet that he would have accepted to sell the shares. What are those benefits that he would receive when he sells the shares? Jack asked curiously. The price of the shares offered by the system is higher than in the market, so it should be easy for him to decide to sell the shares. Jack. In the next moment, why don't you FC King give that money that you spent on buying those shares to me? I'm sure that Denali can use that money to buy even more shares for me. Jack practically screamed in his mind. The whole Calmond was worth $70 billion. If the system bought the shares at a price that the shareholders couldn't refuse, it had to be quite high. It might even be double the market price of the shares. If that was the case, this was akin to spending $140 billion to acquire a business that was worth $70 billion. That was practically a wastage. Though, with the 10% shares in his hands, it should have been $63 billion to $126 billion. Although he had his own thoughts, the system had its own plans and way of doing things. In the end, Jack could only dream about receiving the money, but he wouldn't. How dare you do that? You could have told me that you were buying the shares. So, I could have given you shares from another company and sold these 10% shares to you instead. Jonathan's shout brought Jack from his reverie. Jack looked at him and snorted. You're talking as if I knew that you were going to give me the 10% of Calmond. I was intending to buy all the shares of Calmond. But since you were transferring 10% shares, I had to buy 90%. I would have to look for the person that was getting the other 10% shares so that I could buy them from him. Now, this was a complete surprise that I was the one that got the shares. I guess that I will have to buy them from myself. Jack shrugged at the end. Jonathan looked at Jack. He could only give up because he knew that what Jack had said was logical. Jack didn't know anything about the shares that he was going to receive on this day. But, although he had given up on saying out loud that he blamed Jack, he was still blaming him on the inside. And, he wasn't the least pleased by the fact that he had lost the shares. Although money was important, having shares was even more important to him. The shares represented connections and how fast he could do some things. Now, why are you blaming me for your own mistake? You were only thinking about Wendy during the meeting between the shareholders. And, did you even read the document that you signed, or you simply signed because you saw that the others were signing it? Jack questioned. Jonathan looked at Jack with widened eyes. He couldn't believe that Jack knew what he was thinking about in the meeting. Jack, are you stalking me? As if I can stalk your thoughts. Jack snorted. Jonathan looked at Jack for a while. It was as if he was trying to decipher something from Jack's expression. In the end, he couldn't find anything that could give him a clue about what was going on there. All right, let's leave. I'll be giving you the 10% shares that you gave me as a gift for what you have been helping me with recently. In this way, you can get carried along as I boost the company to the top. Jack stated as he got into the car. Jonathan was left speechless once again. He wondered, am I being gifted my own shares? On the second thought, I think I gave him the shares as compensation? As he thought of that, he went back into the car and drove towards the Angels' Promenade. The reason as to why they had come to this place was because they wanted some privacy as Jack talked with Arthur about respect for other men's women. Inside a hospital ward, Collins opened his eyes. The look of his eyes seemed lost. At this moment, Collins was thinking about what had happened back in Volant City. He gritted his teeth at the thought that his manhood was crippled and he might not be able to have children in the future. At the thought of this, Collins' fury increased even more. Wasn't it just a beautiful girl? No, it was just a face. What is there to make you think that the face was something that could compare to my progeny? Collins growled in his mind. He didn't think that Jack breaking his manhood was something that should have happened. According to him, Celine was at the end of the day, a girl. If she was a girl and he was a man, what was the problem if the two of them mate? Although he was the only one that wanted that to happen, who said that she wouldn't feel good during the process? And what was even more infuriating to him was the fact that he had been completely crippled although he didn't do anything to her. Just you wait. Although I don't know about you, I'm sure that you care about that B*TCH Celine. So, I'll simply have to get my hands on her before getting you. And believe me, your fate will be worse than mine. Collins swore in his heart. As for you bitch, since you thought that being with me alone wasn't something that you could be proud of, I'll let you be proud of being together with a group of 10. Collins clenched his teeth so tightly that even his gums began bleeding slightly. Just then, the door of the ward was opened and a man and a woman rushed in a hurry. The woman was wearing a short navy blue dress that reached her knees. She had a face that was covered in a thick layer of makeup. It was obvious that she was trying to cover up the signs of age catching up to her. From her expression, it was clear that she was worried about Collins. So, the moment that she got into the ward, she rushed towards the bed and asked worriedly, "Are you okay, my baby boy? Tell me, what happened to you? Tell mommy and mommy will make sure that he pays it with his life." As for the man that had gotten in with the lady, he was wearing a khaki suit. His expression was vicious and he looked like a schemer. Though, that was to be expected as he was in business. And sometimes, business didn't just require a business mind, sometimes, there were situations that required scheming. Although he didn't say a word, he was ready to go and look for the person that dared to harm his son. This was the only child that he had with his wife. He had been involved in an accident after Collins was 7 years old, and since then, he had never had a child. According to the medical report, his fertility was affected. He was having great hopes that his bloodline would continue through this son of his. He himself had great hopes that he would have a team of children. But since he couldn't, he had to depend on his son. But now, his son had also been crippled. As for getting him back to the condition where he could have a progeny, that was something that the doctors were still working on. To say the least, he was greatly angered at the fact that his son was crippled. He was just waiting for the name of the person that did this. The person behind this all is Celine and her boyfriend. Collins replied through his gritted teeth. The person behind this all is Celine and her boyfriend. Collins replied through his gritted teeth. Who is this Celine that you are talking about? Collins' father asked with a frown on his face. Although he cared so much about his son, he had always been busy with work and rarely paid attention to what types of friends his son interacted with. But, as long as Collins informed him that there was a problem somewhere, he would make sure to help him in taking care of it before leaving him to his own devices. Collins' mother, whose eyes were red at the moment, also looked at Collins, waiting for his reply. To them, it didn't matter who it was, as long as that person dared to lay a finger on their only son, then they would make sure that the person paid a heavy price for it. The one from the Gravy family. At the mere mention of the Gravy family, Collins was forced to remember the brutal light that he had encountered. That was the night that he had faced his worst nightmare yet, and to say the least, he didn't want to experience such a thing again in his life. But that did mean that he didn't want vengeance. The Gravy family? Colin's father asked doubtfully. From what he knew, the Gravy family wasn't particularly big. It was smaller compared to his family. In other words, if he wanted to make sure that the Gravy family suffered, as long as he paid a price, he could manage to make them drop from the league that they were in. Yes, the one that owns a cosmetics company. Collins affirmed his father's doubt. Since that is the case, then I will make sure that they pay the price that is enough to compensate for whatever they have done to you. Colin's father said as his eyes turned cold. That is definitely not enough. The family will suffer because they failed to educate their daughter well. But the two culprits of what had happened to my son have to pay as well, Colin's mother stated. Her expression at this moment was nothing far from a person who was deranged. She was getting crazy at the fact that she would not have anyone to call her grandmother. Do you know who her boyfriend is? Colin's father asked. Collins remained silent for a moment as he tried not remembering what Jack had done to him on that night. He could still remember the pain that he had faced when Jack kicked him. He didn't wish to remember about the pain that he had suffered that night, added to the charges that he was placed under. Yes, they had reported him for attempted rape. And as they were speaking, there were two police officers who were keeping guard at the door. They were going to make sure that the moment that Collins was released from the hospital, they would take him away so that he could face the charges that were placed on him in court. But even now, although there was clear evidence about his actions, he wasn't afraid that he was going to be sent to jail. He was sure that way his parents' influence, there was no way that he was going to be sentenced in court. That is the person that I hate the most. He is the one that crippled me. He is the reason as to why I am currently in the hospital. His name is Jack. I haven't gotten much details on him because I was still doing a background check on him, Collins replied. But according to the information that I've already gotten on him, he is nothing but a poor boy who is depending on the girls. Collins continued as he remembered the incident where Jack's car was smashed before he smashed by Garpy. When Jack smashed Garpy's Lamborghini Diablo, they had been called so that they could take care of Jack. In the end, he was saved by Wendy, who claimed that he was her fiancé. If that is the case, then there's nothing to worry about. We can simply get that girl Celine to tell us where her boyfriend is. Then we can take care of them, Colin's mother stated. Colin's father was just about to say something when the door of the ward was pushed open. Then, a police officer entered the room and stared at the couple. Your time to see the suspect has ended. You're supposed to leave right now so that you don't compromise our duty. The male police officer stated as he stared at the two parents with a stern gaze. What do you mean by saying that our time has already elapsed? It has only been 2 minutes since we entered this room. You give us 5 minutes. That means that there are still 3 minutes left. Colin's mother retorted angrily. The male police officer knew that it was true that they still had time. But he was doing this on purpose. He and his partner were standing just outside the door. That meant that they could hear whatever was being said inside the ward. In other words, they had heard clearly what the couple were discussing. They themselves knew what Collins had done because they were involved in the case. To say the least, they were disgusted at the behavior that Collins had. To try abusing someone surely was one of the things that was hated by the public the most. And instead of admonishing their son of whatever he had done, the parents, who were just as vicious as the son, were instead supporting him of his actions. What's more, they were even looking for ways that they could use to get back at the person who had crippled their son. That was not it. They even wanted to get their vengeance on the victim. Not sure if he could continue to listen to what they were going to say next, the police officer had decided to enter the ward and send away these two people. And if he could have gotten any evidence, he could have made sure to have locked up the couple by now. But, whatever they had said was also considered evidence in case there was anything that was going to happen to the victim. I'm sorry sir, madam, but I have just been informed that people are not allowed to visit the suspect until the court verdict is out, the police officer stated. What nonsense are you babbling about? Do you think I don't know the law? Do you think that just because you are wearing a police uniform I'm going to be afraid of you? Let me tell you clearly, I have seen a lot in all the years that I've engaged in business. And I know that the laws don't change in a matter of minutes without any information or discussion. So, don't you dare continue disturbing our moments with our son. Otherwise, I'm going to make sure that you are not going to maintain your position in the police force any longer, Colin's father threatened. It doesn't matter if you are educated or not, it doesn't matter if you are smart or gullible. What matters now is that you have to get out of the ward at the moment, or I'm going to arrest you for trying to interfere in police matters, the officer stated seriously. Colin's father wanted to retort, but as a person who had been in the business for long, He could tell that the police wasn't going to give him. Since this wasn't a matter of life and death to his son, he decided to take a step back because he knew he wouldn't win against the law. Since that is the way you want to play, no problem at all. I'm going to see your superiors and we'll see what happens next, Colin's father stated before pulling his wife out of the ward. His wife kept on screaming and shouting about this and that, or how law was unfair to their son. According to her, her son had not made a mistake that was big enough for him to be crippled, not to mention that he was being sued for attempted RP case. Jack organized for Denali to arrange the shares transfer contract for 10% shares of Calmont Entertainment Company. He was going to give Jonathan the 10% shares as he had promised. After ending the call with the Denali, Jack returned the phone that he had borrowed from Jonathan. Then, a few minutes later, he and Jonathan arrived in front of Angel's Prominence. Since he had already dealt with Arthur, Jack wanted to explain a few things to Caitlin about what was going on. Jonathan, on the other hand, since the business that had brought him to Angel's Prominence, get the information about Jack's whereabouts, were already dealt with, he decided to leave and deal with the things that he had yet to do. Jack got to the 18th floor of the building from the elevator. He found that the staff members had already begun working just as the normal days. But the difference was that they were clearly murmuring to each other about what had happened about an hour ago. When they saw Jack coming in, they were awed and at the same time, scared of him. So, all the chattering on the floor seized the moment that he entered. Jack completely ignored them and headed towards Caitlin's office. When he got in, he found that Caitlin had already covered the palm mark on her cheek using makeup. Furthermore, inside the office, there was an additional person that Jack had not seen quite a while now. It was Faith, Celine's current personal assistant. It has been a while, Faith. Jack greeted the moment that he entered the office. It has been indeed. Faith replied with a smile on her face. She too knew about Jack's relationship with Jonathan. So, she has been helping Celine in telling Caitlin about Jack and his relationship with Jonathan. After some pleasantries between the two of them, Jack finally took a seat after being reminded by the impatient Caitlin. It is good that you are back. All the Celine has told me a lot about what is going on. I still want to hear it firsthand from you. What happened really during the years that we have not met? Caitlin spoke the moment that Jack took a seat. It is good that you are back. All the Celine has told me a lot about what is going on. I still want to hear it firsthand from you. What happened really during the years that we have not met? Caitlin spoke the moment that Jack took a seat. Jack had already been expecting this. So without hiding anything, he informed his mother-in-law to be about his relationship with Jonathan and the Jezda family. Although he didn't speak much about these assets or his wealth that he currently possessed, he was sure that she knew about his influence at the moment. Although she had already been informed about this by the two girls in the office, Caitlin was shocked by a great extent. She really needed some time to digest the information that she had received. On the other hand, Jack shifted his attention to Faith. He took out a small bottle that contained the body strengthening solution. I gave it to her and told her to ask Celine about what it was supposed to do. After a while, Caitlin got out of her thoughts and looked at Jack. So, that's your mother's background, huh? Caitlin nodded her head as she looked at Jack. Jack simply smiled wryly. He looked at her as he shrugged. I only knew about this only recently. Otherwise, I never would have known that my mother had such a background. Jack paused for a moment before he continued. You know, since I grew up, till I was 19, I never knew my mother's surname, let alone background. I have only recently known about that due to the letter that she had left for me. Caitlin nodded. She too knew Anne as Anne, nothing more than that. She had tried getting information about Anne's background. But in the end, seeing that she had no intention of mentioning it, Caitlin gave up on that, thinking that perhaps there was something that made Anne move away from her maternal home. And if that something wasn't pleasant, she wasn't willing to bring it up if it would keep on ruining the good mood that they were sharing. Celine, on the other hand, went ahead and hugged Jack. She was feeling the pain for Jack, just imagining about not knowing about his mother and losing her as well. This was something that she couldn't imagine how it felt. But all the same, she didn't want to experience it. She now just wanted to comfort Jack. She knew that although Jack was now smiling, he was just like any other man. He would hide the pain that he was feeling deep in his heart as he tried putting on a strong front when he was together with other people. In the end, due to the chests of men carrying a lot, they end up aging faster, getting depressed, and that they end up as alcoholics. There were even some situations where there were people that committed a homicide or suicide. All the same, she didn't want Jack to be one of them. Even though she knew that he wasn't going to say it loud and neither was he going to show it, She would try making him tell her what he felt. In this way, she could relieve him of the pain in his heart. Thinking of this, she hugged him even tighter. Since they were sitting on the couch, she could only hug him from the side. Although it is said that she was hugging him, it was like she was snuggling into his arms like a kitten. Even though she was in front of her mother, she wasn't the least afraid that she would scold her for showing her affection for Jack in front of her. Since she had approved of the relationship between the two of them, she thought that there was nothing wrong. Additionally, it was just a hug, nothing big really. Jack on the other hand had no issues of being intimate with Celine. With his memories of her in place, he didn't feel strange as they did many things together during their childhood and that they would be embarrassed if they were said out loud. Faith was surprised that the two of them were hugging each other, and that too in front of Caitlin. As Faith had worked under Caitlin before she was assigned to Celine, she knew Caitlin's personality when it came to Celine. She was a strict mother and would definitely not allow such intimate actions during working hours. But now, other than looking at the two for a while before shifting her gaze somewhere else, she didn't say anything else. And to say the truth, Faith had been expecting that Caitlin was going to scold the two of them. But, remembering that Caitlin knew about Jack and knew about his mother, she kind of understood. Then, she narrowed her eyes as she looked at the two who were publicly showing their affection for each other and thought, "It seems that my previous assumptions were right. These two definitely knew each other before they met in Inchoate City. And, they were trying to play some game on me all along. It is no wonder that their relationship progressed faster than ordinary ones. And, the way that they were talking and laughing with each other, that was something that those who had met a few days ago don't do. Sharing the secrets, although not deep ones, but sharing them all the same, I just don't know why they were playing around." Faith analyzed the situation in her mind. "Jack, are you alright?" Celine asked in a low tone. Although he was confused, Jack still nodded his head and replied, "Of course I am. Was I supposed to not be okay, in the end?" he asked. Celine raised her head from Jack's chest and stared into his eyes. She could see the confusion on his face. She thumped his chest with her soft fist and said, "Idiot, I'm talking about the issue concerning your mother. Are you really okay?" Jack finally understood where Celine was coming from. Previously when she heard that Jack's mother had died, although she felt sorry for Jack, she didn't have that much deep feelings for Anne as she didn't remember her at all. But now, things were completely different. She had regained her memories of Jack and as such, she could remember about Anne. So, it was true that she felt that she had lost a lot due to the lack of Anne's presence in her life now. Now that she had received the news that Jack's mother was dead, she now had the feelings of getting something that she loved being snatched from her. Now, even she felt a pang of pain in her heart when Jack's mother, her aunt, died. Now, what about the direct victim, the person that had lost his mother himself? Thinking of this, she wanted to share the burden that Jack was facing with him. That was the reason as to why she had asked if he was okay. "You don't need to worry about this at all." Jack caressed Celine's hair as he pulled a strand of her hair behind her ears. "You know you can talk to me if you have anything in mind, right?" Seeing that Jack wasn't willing to talk about it, Celine could only give up temporarily. She would have to look for him later once they were alone. "I know that. But there is no need for you to worry about anything. I'm fine. You know, I have faced the truth that my mother was dead for over 4 years now. So, even if I'm talking about it now, that doesn't change the fact that I already faced the truth," Jack stated. Hearing his words, Celine stared deep into his eyes. She could see the sincerity in them and she could tell that he was speaking the truth. But at the same time, she was blaming herself that she wasn't there at the moment that he needed her the most. Living in a place like the Alfonso mansion, where everyone ostracized him, and that too being the moment that he had lost his mother, that was indeed a hard time on him. That was also not to mention that Jack was only 15 years old back then. He must have undergone a lot of psychological pressure due to the loss of someone important to him, as well as the mocking from the half-siblings and cousins in the mansion. Seeing the way that Celine's eyes had turned and they were slightly glazed, Jack was surprised. But then, he saw the sadness that was in her eyes as well as the self-blame. Jack wanted to comfort her and tell her that this wasn't her fault when he was interrupted by the sound of someone clearing her throat. "Ahem. You two can continue with your lovey-dovey moment later. Can we talk about serious things now?" Caitlin asked as she looked at her daughter and Jack who were still hugging on the couch. Jack nodded in response. And seeing that her mother was quite serious, Celine also got out of Jack's embrace and sat properly as she waited for her mother to talk. Seeing that she had managed to garner the attention of the two, Caitlin's expression turned solemn as she spoke. "Jack, What is going to happen between you and that Arthur? From what I have heard about him, I know for sure that his background isn't small. And from the conversation that he was having with that Jonathan, I could tell that there was a relationship with him. So, can you tell me how we are going to handle the situation? Jack knew what Caitlin was worried about. Arthur, that was someone from the Jezda family. And from the words that Celine and Faith had used to describe to Caitlin about the Jezda family, she knew that this was a family that wasn't supposed to be messed with. But now, Arthur had targeted her daughter and he had been beaten up in her office. Without a doubt, she could tell that Jack must have beaten him or something when they left the building. So, it was out of question that Arthur would try to seek revenge. What really worried Caitlin was the fact that Jack and Celine would be targeted. She wasn't afraid if Arthur went for her, but she was extremely afraid that he would go after the two. "Aunt, there's no need for you to worry about that. I have already dealt with Arthur, temporarily. So, you can be assured that he won't be coming back in a few months' time," Jack replied. "As for how I'm going to handle the background and so, I already planned to deal with his father. So, we can just say that this is called preponing the plans that I previously had," Jack stated with his eyes turning cold. "As for how I'm going to handle the background and so, I already planned to deal with his father. So, we can just say that this is called preponing the plans that I previously had," Jack stated with his eyes turning cold. Since it seems that he had to deal with Arthur's father as early as now, then Jack won't shy away from this opportunity or challenge. Jonathan had already ruined his plans to meet with the Jezda family only after he was sure that he could destroy them as long as they tried messing with him. Although he didn't mind being confused with Jonathan as long as the confusion wouldn't lead him into problems, he was quite tired of it. If the members of the Jezda family could know that he and Jonathan were lookalikes, then it would make things better for him. As for the situation where his mother was being condemned for running away from home, he didn't care at all. As long as he found one person who dared to badmouth his mother, he would make sure that he dealt with them properly. Caitlin looked at Jack with surprise in her eyes. She had already known about the influence that Arthur had, and that was just relying on the background that he was having. But now, Jack was confidently saying that he was going to deal with the background that was supporting Arthur. Although she wasn't sure who Arthur's father was, she was sure that he was a big shot. "Are you sure about what you are saying, Jack?" Caitlin asked worriedly. "Don't worry, Aunt, I am confident in doing whatever I'm saying. Furthermore, it is just dealing with a single person and not the whole family. But if the whole family dares to try backing him up, I don't mind dealing with them as well," Jack stated calmly. Caitlin looked at Jack. She wasn't sure where his confidence was coming from. She wasn't even sure if this was confidence or stupidity. From what Faith and Celine had informed her of Jack, she knew that Jack wasn't depending on the Jezda family. But now there was a question in her mind: how on earth did Jack become so rich, even richer than her? She could still remember that they had parted only a few years ago. And within those 5 years or more, she was sure that it wasn't enough for Jack to build such big influence. As for Anne doing all of this in secret before passing away, this was something that she didn't even consider. If it was true that Anne could do such a thing, then why would she stay away from her sister for over 2 decades? Not knowing what was going on in Caitlin's mind, Jack got to his feet and decided that it was time for him to leave. Arthur's incident had reminded him of Colin's. That was something that he was planning to handle at this exact moment that he was going to leave. As for the lackeys that he had, there were only a few days before the timeline that he had given them expired. Since he was sure that they were going to fail to fulfill their end of the bargain, he could as well start the preparation as of now. He had already shifted the plans that he was having. He no longer planned to make them bankrupt. Instead, he was planning to have all their wealth and assets at the least price possible. At the end of the day, making them bankrupt would not benefit him in any way. He might as well use their wealth to boost the net worth of the Gravy family. He was sure that as long as the Gravy family was counted as one of the richest families, then they will no longer be in trouble with small fries. And even though he had given Celine and her mother the body strengthening solution, that didn't mean that she wasn't worried about the safety at all. Although they were going to be strong, in case they were attacked using bullets or even a bomb, their lives would be at stake. "Jack, let me walk you out," Celine offered before she followed Jack out of the office. The two ladies who were left inside the office began talking and making assumptions of what Jack was planning to do. "Faith, you have been with Jack for a while now, since he got the way he is now, I mean. Do you think he has the capabilities of dealing with Arthur's father?" Caitlin asked with a frown creased on her face. It wasn't that she wasn't confident in Jack's ability, it was just that she was worried about him. This had clouded her judgment to see that Jack could already make Arthur fear him. Arthur wasn't someone who was strong, instead, it was his background that was strong. And this was the exact reason as to why Arthur was confident in dealing with the problems that he was facing or creating. But, if even he was scared, didn't that mean that he wasn't confident that the background that he was having wasn't capable enough of dealing with the problem that he was currently facing? Mrs. Caitlin, although I don't know Jack's full capabilities at the moment, I can fully assure you that I have never seen Jack act if he wasn't confident enough, Faith replied. Faith, I told you not to refer to me formally as long as we are alone. You don't have to be so uptight, Caitlin stated as she looked at Faith. Okay, Aunt. This was the way that Caitlin had asked her to be referring to her, as long as they were alone or they were not at work. Since she graduated, Faith had been working under Caitlin. Caitlin had already made herself clear that she was nurturing her so that she could help her daughter in the future in terms of managing the business. And it wasn't like they had met only after Faith had graduated from the university. Instead, Caitlin was the one who had sponsored Faith's high school education. Now that's better. Caitlin nodded her head in satisfaction. Then she began thinking about what Faith had said. In the end, she could only release a heavy sigh before stating, I hope that everything goes well. Jack and Celine walked out of the office under the scrutinizing gazes of the staff members. These people was still curious about what had really occurred inside the office. But in the end, they were so embarrassed to ask about it when they were not willing to give out any assistance. Of course, the duo ignored their gazes and headed for the elevator. When they got inside, Celine hugged Jack again. Jack was quite surprised by her action. Although he wasn't sure as to why she had decided to hug him like that, he didn't think much of it. But then, Celine's question made him realize what or why she had decided to hug him. Jack, after I take the body strengthening solution, I would need to undergo training so that I can have the skills to protect myself. I don't want to be a burden to you, Celine stated. But as you know, I don't know anyone other than you and Jonathan who can train me in the combat skills. So, could you please take me in as your student? Celine continued as she looked directly into Jack's eyes. Jack looked back at her, and he could see that she had some longing for power. She seemed determined to do what she was saying. In the end, Jack chuckled as he ruffled her hair. What are you thinking? Did you perhaps forget about someone? Celine looked at Jack confusedly. She thought for a while if there was someone who could train her in the combat sector. In the end, she could only shake her head and look at Jack. I don't think I forgot to mention anyone who knows how to fight and can teach me. Aren't you forgetting about Denali so easily? Jack questioned amusedly. It was only then that Celine remembered of the incident that had happened when she was kidnapped by Collins and his lackeys. At that time, at a fast speed, Denali had broken the hands of all those that were holding her down. That was definitely not something that anyone can do. Not only did one need to have strength, but that person definitely needed to have skills so that he or she could manage to deal with the group. Celine pouted as she responded to Jack. Denali is always busy, so I don't want to disturb her. Ever since she received her memories of the time that she had spent with Jack in their childhood, she had gotten even more intimate with Jack. Now, even the expressions that she was trying to hide previously were easily revealed without even herself knowing it. You do look cute when you do that. Jack chuckled. I can free Denali so that she can train you easily. No, I guess I better go and ask Jonathan to train me instead, Celine responded. Hearing her words, Jack immediately knew that she was trying to rile him up. All the same, he decided to play along. If he accepts to do that, I'll make sure that after every training session that you have with him, I'll beat him up. You are jealous, aren't you? Celine looked at him as she questioned with a smile on her face. Not really, I'm quite possessive and protective, Jack shrugged. So, when is the training starting? Celine smiled even wider after hearing Jack's words. And although Jack had not stated that he was the one going to train her, there was no need for him to say anything because she knew that he wasn't going to allow another person to do that. And she was right, Jack responded. Just tell me the time that you are free. I'll make sure to train you all I can. Okay then, I'll have to ask my mother about arranging a different schedule for my training, Celine stated as she got out of his embrace. The elevator had already gotten to the ground floor. What do you think about training your mother and Faith after I have finished training you? Jack questioned as they stepped out of the elevator. That's a great idea. I want to see how my mother will be like when she is my student, Celine chuckled at the thought. Is this all the information that you have on Jack? A man who was wearing a military uniform questioned it looked at the documents that he was holding in his hands. These were the exact documents that Valnaro had been reading when he was in his office. They contained the information about Jack that had been obtained after a whole week's effort. He had already submitted his report about Jack to his immediate superior. At the moment that Jack delivered the body strengthening solution, it was the moment that the higher-ups decided to have a meeting with him. They had already seen the magic that the solution did. The 50 bottles that Jack had delivered to them were given to the soldiers that had the highest merits. All of these soldiers were injured during the war with another nation. And since they could not be treated due to the current level of the medical technology, they had been forced to retire early. But now, with the assistance of the body strengthening solution, these soldiers were now back on their feet and were stronger than they were previously. This had immediately made all the higher-ups of the military to cause a commotion. They had called for a meeting immediately after the results were seen. Although during the time that Valnaro was presenting the opportunities that Jack had granted them, there were several people who were against the idea. Once the results were out, they were amongst the first ones to rush towards Valnaro, trying to get all the information that they could about Jack. In the end, due to the intervention of Valnaro's superior, all those that were pestering him for information about Jack were forced to stop. After that, all the 50 people who had taken the solution were placed under observation for the past 2 days, and on this specific day, they had confirmed that there were no side effects of taking the solution. Of course, this was only after numerous tests that were conducted by the best doctors that the military had. When they confirmed that there were no changes that had been caused by the solution, other than the strengthening of the body cells, they were immediately ecstatic. This was the reason as to why Valnaro was standing in front of his immediate superior, giving the report about Jack. "Yes, sir," Valnaro replied confidently. Before he submitted the report, he had made sure to do all the research that could be done on Jack. Although he couldn't find that much information on Jack as long as it was related to the information was on the net or computers. He had even sent a few people to the companies that he had found that Jack was the owner to do some investigation. But, what had surprised him was the fact that there were very few people that knew about him. The only way that he could get information about Jack was through the higher-ups of the company. But in the end, they got very limited information about Jack from those that were in the top management of the companies. These people had tight lips and they only revealed the basic information about Jack. No matter what means they used to get the information, giving money and so on, these people said nothing. In fact, the moment that they realized that the people were asking about Jack, and they specifically weren't interested in business talks, these people made sure to completely forget about giving the information. There were even the situations where these people sent away those that were asking of Jack's information. But of course, it wasn't like Valnaro had just sent anyone to go and ask about Jack. It was obvious that if someone that you didn't know suddenly came to you and asked about the information of your boss, you would send that person away immediately. So, Valnaro had made sure to investigate all the people that were in the top management of GVSL, Glaze Hotel and Hope Hospital. After that, he looked for the people that were closely related to them and paid them to look for information. But of course, he made sure not to reveal the information that he was from the military. But all the same, the information that he had received was limited, not much different from the one that he had gotten before. What Valnaro didn't know was the fact that there were even a few higher-ups that didn't know much about Jack. Although he was the boss of the companies or the hotel, he had only visited them once or twice. That was apart from GVSL that he was quite involved with, and Tracy had gotten much information about him. But still, she didn't reveal any information about Jack. Although it's not as detailed as I wanted, it should be enough to tell me that this Jack isn't someone that can be considered as a threat, the major stated as he squinted his eyes. Although there was information about Jack and the body strengthening solution, they had made sure not to reveal the information about that to the whole military and the country. Even in the military, there was competition. And since the number of body strengthening solution that could be delivered to them was limited, they couldn't accept the other garrisons to know about this as of now. There were several competitions that involved different garrisons that were located in different parts of the country. The one that was stationed in the central province were the ones that had gotten the deal with Jack. And since they were located in the central province, they were the ones that were considered weak as compared to the other garrisons. Although they were stationed in the central province, that didn't mean that they didn't participate in the war. They were assigned missions at different times according to the needs or the situation. As for the competition for Jack's information, that was a competition between the majors that were involved. There were 3 majors in the garrison, all of them were headed by a colonel. That I have ascertained, sir. I did all I could to get the information on him or the opinions that those that had met him had on him. All of them were positive, apart from his family who seems not to like him at all, Valnaro replied. At this moment, there wasn't even a hint of air of superiority that was there when he led his soldiers to the Glaze Hotel. Now, he was subservient. This was mainly due to the respect that he had for this superior of his. I guess I'll have to speak with the colonel to see if we can pull him in. If he joins our garrison, there's no doubt that we would be strong enough to deal with the incoming tournament. The major nodded his head as he stated. Upon hearing this, Valnaro's eyes widened in surprise. He couldn't help but ask, "Is that necessary, sir?" From my impression of Jack when I met him, although he isn't the type that would betray our country, I can tell that he is someone who deals with things according to benefits. He agreed to have a deal of supplying us the body-strengthening solution because he saw an opportunity to benefit from it. And now, I don't think that he would agree to leave his freedom so that he can join the military. Valnaro stated his points. What was his strength level from your evaluation or from those videos that you brought from the hotel? The major asked. I can say that he is by far the strongest person that I have ever met before. He even has a personal assistant who is just as strong, Valnaro replied. I'm not talking just about physical strength, I'm referring to him as a whole. Anything that can be considered as his strength, the major corrected. That, he is very strong. Other than physically, he has a team of experts that can do things that even those that are in our entire garrison cannot accomplish. As for financially, with that group as his backing, there is no doubt that he is strong as well, Valnaro replied honestly. Then, what do you think if we want to recruit the experts that are under him? Major asked. I tried it already, but he seems to have no intention of letting go of them. From the answer that he gave back then, it was clear that he wasn't intending on releasing part of his strength. Valnaro replied. Though, he was wondering where the conversation was heading towards. Then, what do you think will happen the moment that he joins our garrison? Major asked. A smile appeared on his ever-serious face. At this moment, Valnaro finally caught on to what the major was trying to imply. His eyes shone with surprise and realization. Seeing his reaction, the major nodded. He then stated, that's right. If we manage to recruit him, there would be no problems if we want to use his experts at all. In other words, we would be having a better deal with the body-strengthening solution. Perhaps we might even gain the formula of the production. Then, theirs is a fact that he himself is a strong warrior and he can make a good soldier as long as he follows the military routine. And then, what about him sharing his skills with the soldiers here? He would definitely be able to raise the quality of soldiers here in tandem with the body-strengthening solution that would be improving their physical qualities. Valnaro nodded his head when he heard the major's analysis. But at the same time, he was quite skeptical that Jack could accept to join the military. After all, the way that Jack had handled his vice-captain when he had provoked him was enough to show that Jack didn't know the issue of a superior or not. He was someone that only discussed with those that had the strength to be on the same level as him. He expressed his doubts to the major. On the other hand, the major smiled as he spoke confidently. You don't need to worry about that. As long as the colonel approves of this, there would be no problem at all. Since he is someone that deals with benefits, we can simply offer him benefits that he can't refuse. After leaving Angel's prominence, he immediately went back to his villa. He had to prepare a training schedule for Celine. Since he himself was already a professional when it came to combat, then it wasn't something hard for him to instruct Celine on the fighting techniques. Although he had previously been asking Celine about choosing other people to train her, he was obviously joking with her. There was definitely no way that he was going to lose this chance that he could use to stay with Celine. Furthermore, he could enjoy her company as he trained her. When he got to the villa in the Serenity residential area, he got to work. He started planning the right way that he would start training Celine. He had to make sure that she was good to go in the least time possible. And although he wanted to speed things up for her training, that was for the basics. In the other areas, it would need a long period of time. So basically, whatever Jack wanted at the moment was to make sure that Celine was capable of utilizing the strength that came along with the consumption of the body-strengthening solution. After about 10 minutes, Jack had come up with a good training schedule. Since Celine would already be physically fit, there was no need for the physical training and so on. The only that was required was to simply train her skills and reaction to different situations and attacks. After he was done, Jack decided that it was time for him to deal with other things. With Arthur currently out of the picture, he was going to deal with Collins. Unlike the lackeys that he had given them a chance that they could use to redeem themselves, He wasn't going to give Collins a single chance at all. At the end of the day, if his plans had succeeded back then, Celine wouldn't have had another chance. So, he was going to be merciless just like Collins had planned to be like. Now then, he took out his overly expensive laptop. It was time that he used this thing that he had bought. He had spent a total of $3.5 million to acquire it. Alpha GLESN Newell. Looking back to his decision to buy the expensive laptop that was present on the online market, Jack shook his head. He wasn't sure if it was just that the wealth that he had recently gained that had gotten over his head or what. But to think that he had spent so much money to acquire a laptop whose price was higher due to the fact that it had diamonds on it. He had to agree that he truly was idiotic back then. All the same, he had decided that he was the one that was going to handle Collins' family personally. He had already given Denali a lot of work and he thought that it was time for her to rest. Furthermore, she too had her life. He was supposed to create some time for her so that she could at least go back home and visit her family. Placing the laptop in front of him, Jack took a deep breath. He decided that it was finally time for him to use the opportunity that he had received from the system to choose a skill that he wanted. This was the chance that he had gotten after earning his first buck from playing basketball that was organized by Jonathan. The first skill that came in his mind was computer mastery. This was the thing that had been disturbing him back in the days that he was still in the university. Although he knew some of the basics of using the computer, there were a lot of things that he was still missing. And he wasn't willing to miss the things now. He had learnt the automation engineering. This was something that involved technology. And as a result, there were a lot of calculations that couldn't be done by a simple calculator. Instead, they required a computer for that to happen. This had troubled him back then. And this was the exact reason as to why he didn't want to engage with the numbers, as this reminded him of how hectic it had been for him back in campus. And since that was the first thing that came in his mind, Jack chose it immediately. Angel, I would like to acquire the same skill, computer mastery. Jack stated in his mind. Confirm that you want to use the free skill slot for computer mastery? Confirm that. Jack replied without a hint of hesitation. Confirmed. The skill slot is used. Computer mastery acquired. Ingraining the skill into the host's mind and body, the host will feel slightly uncomfortable. The moment that Angel's voice faded, Jack suddenly felt that his brain was being overloaded. This was by far the most uncomfortable feeling that he had gotten since the time that he had gotten the system. Even when he got the professional combat and professional basketball and driving skills, he didn't feel this way at all. Had it not been for the fact that his mind had been strengthened further due to the fact that he was a professional combatant with great mental strength and will, he might have passed out. Jack was now wondering why the system was undermining things. This was definitely not slight discomfort, this was great discomfort. At the same moment, Jack felt that there was a load of information that was being dumped into his mind at that point. The things that he previously didn't understand were now becoming more clear at the moment. The codes that Denali had been typing when Jack was observing her, the things that didn't make sense to him, were now as easy as 1 + 1. In the end, Jack could only close his eyes as he tried digesting the information that was coming in his mind. At the same time, he tried ignoring the discomfort feeling that he was getting. His hands began twitching and so did his body muscles. Without even he himself noticing it, he had changed his seating posture. Then, the muscle memory was altered by the system as Jack continued digesting the information and making sure that he understood them completely. This went on for almost an hour. And then, Jack finally opened his eyes that shone with a strange golden glint that vanished in the next second as if it were never there to begin with. Jack took a deep breath as he finally felt that the burden that was on his mind had finally been lifted. He got to his feet and did a few stretches before sitting back on the couch. He then thought of something and asked, Angel, why is it that I'm the only one that felt uncomfortable during the time that I was receiving the skill while Denali was just fine when the skill was being ingrained into her? You'll have to understand that there is a great difference between the two of you. Denali was receiving an ability. This was akin to something that she had gained naturally. And although it is being referred to as an ability, it's still a skill. The reason as to why it's called an ability is due to the fact that, unlike you who received the memories, Denali could do that naturally. Furthermore, during the time that she was being given the ability, she didn't really know about that at all. At that moment, there was an alteration in her mind. And as a result, she didn't notice that there was something that was added to her mind at all. Jack was left speechless for a moment. He then shook his head in the end. He had been wondering why the system had not done the same thing as it did with Denali. But in the end, just thinking about the alterations in the mind and memories, he gave up on that idea. He had already had his memories messed with. Although he didn't know how the person that had done it did it, he really didn't wish to forget about the things that he thought important to him. Jack then shifted his attention to the laptop that was in front of him. But, he was surprised to find that the laptop was different from the way that it was before. Jack was sure that there was no way that he was hallucinating or something. So, there either had to be a problem with the laptop or there was a problem with his eyes. Just then, Angel's voice reached him. It's not that you are hallucinating or there have been any changes to the laptop in front of you. It's just that there is a change in the way that you can see things that are related to computers. I believe that you have realized that the computer mastery that you have gotten doesn't simply involve the software, it also involves the hardware. Even the procedure of putting together a laptop or computer as long as you have all the required parts is in you right now. As such, different from the other people, as long as the thing that you are looking at is related to a computer, you will enter a condition where your eyes will change. In other words, you can see through anything that is computer related. If it's a problem, a firewall and so on, that is something that you can fix in a matter of seconds. Jack was stunned. He had never expected that the skill that he had received from the system would be so overpowered. It was true that he had received all the information about the computers, both hardware and software. He could even put together the computer or laptop as long as he got all the parts. It was just that he didn't have the knowledge of how to manufacture these parts. In other words, he would have to buy the already manufactured parts so that he could put together a laptop or computer. Although he was sad that he didn't get that knowledge and skills to do that, he really didn't feel that bad. The longer that you have a free skill slot to select a skill, the better the skill that you would receive in the future. Host, please keep that in mind. Jack. FCK.